This is my 2000 Aprilia Pegaso. I put quite a few miles on this. Actually, I've put over 50,000 miles on it since I've owned it. And I've done a lot of modifications, a lot of upgrades, a lot of different things. I haven't ridden it much in the last year, and I'm having a problem with it overheating. It's filling up the coolant bottle, and I keep having to refill the radiator. Now, these are notorious for having problems with the coolant being burped, but I suspect at this point that it's probably a head gasket issue. So today I'm going to take off the tank and the fairing, and or maybe just the tank, so I can get to the radiator easily, which is located underneath the tank. You can see the cap right there, and see if I can't see bubbles from the blown head gasket, and that will determine whether or not I'm going to pull the engine out. So I've got the bike apart. You can probably hear the fan running there. And it is definitely bubbling, and it overheated pretty easily. So it blew a lot of the water back out. I also cleaned up the contacts for the coil, took the spark plug out and cleaned it, and made sure that the spark plug wire was attached good. And I took a look at all of my grounds too, and made sure those were all attached good, and the battery had a good connection. So the bike seems to be running well, but it is blowing air out through the radiator. So next step is to take the motor out. Alright, so radiator, motor, carbs, all of that stuff is out. I do have to say that this engine was quite a bit more difficult to get out than I had imagined, and I probably made it harder on myself, being that I've never done this before on this bike. I think next time, before I put it back together, I'm going to take all of the exhaust off, which I didn't. I'm going to take the back tire off. I'm going to break the frame here at these points, so it's easier to get the carbs in and out, and it'll be easier to get the exhaust in and out as well. And that's what I've had to do previously to get the carbs out. You can kind of see them hanging there. But so far so good. Started to tear down on the motor. I got the valve cover off. Just so you guys know, all of these caps are numbered, so they're pretty easy to figure out where they go. And then this one valve here on the back, these are totally unique, so you can't mess up where those go. And all of the bolts are the same also. And I also made some marks so that I get everything back where it's supposed to be when I put it back together. I did actually print out a manual, so sorry about that. I did print out a manual, so I'll have a little help getting this thing apart and putting it back together, and hopefully things go well. Stay tuned. So I got the valves out today. Move that away there. And the seats are all in pretty good condition. The exhaust valves were pretty beat up, as you can see. They got quite a bit of buildup on them, and you know, a little baked from being exhaust valves, of course. The intake valves are all in pretty good shape. So I looked around trying to find anybody that did media blasting, and I had no luck at all, at least not locally here. So what I ended up doing was buying a dozen cans, or half dozen cans of brake cleaner. Got some of these cleaning pads that I cut up into 4 pieces from O'Reilly's also, and I just kept working at these valves to try and get them clean. And what I also did was put them on my drill, and you could see that came out pretty good. There's still some pitting, so I'm going to have to grind those down a bit in the seats, but both sides turned out pretty well. So This is the clean one. This is the dirty one. And we'll keep working at them. So I've got everything pretty cleaned up now. The head is pretty cleaned up. You can see the base. I'm pretty happy with that. It's not perfect, but it's way better than what it was before. And I've got the top of the cylinder cleaned up also. That came out really good. You can get it to top dead center by rotating the crank with a hex wrench through that middle hole right there. And then you can lock it in on this side. Take that off. Just get a bolt that's longer than 3 inches, let's say, and it's an M8 bolt, and it goes in this hole down here on the bottom. And what that does is it fits into a little gap on the crank that allows you to lock that piston right there, so it won't move at all now. So when I'm ready to put the head back on, I can set my timing marks on the cams and be good for that. So that's it. You can see I got the valves out. Those are all cleaned up pretty well. The exhaust valves were actually in kind of rough shape. I don't know if you can see that, but they're pitted. So I've opted not to lap those and put them in. I didn't want to grind them because I didn't want to have to go really big on the shims in there. So I ordered a couple new valves. We'll see if those show up in time. And to clean up the heads, actually just used a bunch of brake cleaner, just like before with the valves. And these pads I cut up into 4 squares. They're actually ones from O'Reilly. They seem to work pretty good. And if you wear them out, they tend to be a little less aggressive, and you can use that for a little bit of buffing as well. And we'll see how this goes. Right now we're just waiting to get the 2 new valves, and we'll start putting stuff back together. Okay, so a little more progress. Got the head back on, got the cams back in, and got everything lubed up. You see I got quite a bit of assembly lube on everything here, and I figure it's better more than less, and that's what I'm using for assembly lube. I use it on my Volkswagens. Figured it'd be fine for the Aprilia as well. So I rotated the motor a couple times just to make sure everything was still lining up. You can see this one says N for intake, and that one says EX for exhaust. And these little lines right here, kind of hard to see, are supposed to line up with the edge of the case right here. And there's another one over here. It actually has a 1, 2, and 3, so you want the 1. You see that kind of line up with that edge right there. Took my pin out for holding the crank in place, and I don't know if I showed you guys that, but I just ground off the edge of a bolt, and that catches the groove in the crank down under. You can kind of see it back up under there behind the pipe. This bolt goes in there and holds the crank in place, and you can rotate the crank on this side to get it to that location where it's going to hold tight. So I rotated the cams around a couple times using this Allen wrench, and everything's still lined up. So I think I'm going to clean up the valve cover and slap the top end back together. Stay tuned.